name is Allison Angelini, and this is the birth story of my second child, Herb Angelini. Leading up to Herb's birth, I had actually gone through a trauma. My daughter had gotten injured. She fell on a piece of glass and severed her arm, and she was 17 months old. And this is important because I feel like a lot of what kind of happened with my son's birth had a lot to do with my mental state at the time. Um, so I lead with that just to say that I was really kind of struggling. I had been through something that was hard, and I was working to heal it, but I had this really overwhelming feeling that a challenge was coming my way. Another challenge was coming my way. And I actually had a dream when I was about 35 weeks pregnant with Herb that I had my baby and that I didn't know it was a he, but I felt strongly that it was a he, that he was born and that he was white and limp. And I started mouth to mouth resuscitation in my dream. And I woke up not knowing if he lived or not. And so I had that dream around 35 weeks. And then his birth really was very similar to that. And in the dream, he had black hair, and when he was born, he had black hair. So I had kind of this eerie premonition that I realized it was a premonition after the birth. Um, so
Allison, it's not the point of your story, but your daughter, did she lose her arm?
she did not lose her arm, but she severed her ulnar nerve
Hmm.
and she had to have two surgeries. She was 17 months old, my first baby. Um, she was drinking water out of a Yoplait yogurt glass outside. We had been camping and she fell with the glass and the glass broke and went into her arm. And it was just this freak accident that was very traumatic. She was essentially bleeding out, and I had to hold pressure on her arm, and it was just a very deep gash that sent us to the ER, that sent us into surgeries, and then she had ulnar nerve palsy for a number of months, where she was unable to lengthen these two fingers. So that it was just it felt like a living nightmare. My baby looked like reaching up for me and unable to straighten her fingers. And I had a lot of, I was really blaming myself. I had given her the glass. I was dealing with all of those feelings and just having a really hard time mentally. But we actually were kind of on the mend. She got about, I would say, most of her function back in her hand by the time my son was conceived, and that was kind of an unknown. It was a wait and see. We'll see if she can straighten her fingers again. So that was really stressful, and but she did. I think if that injury had to happen to her, that was the best time for it to happen because she was so young and her nerve was able to regain function because she was so young and so vital. So it was just a really beautiful healing story, actually. And in February, after her accident happened in September of 2021, and in February of 2022, she and I were on the beach with my parents and in Florida, and I looked at her and I felt like, oh, you're all alone. You need a sibling to play with. And I went home after that trip and conceived Herb, and then had a very uneventful pregnancy with Herb. It was a healthy pregnancy. Just other than my mental state, I was dealing with a lot of kind of external stressors. So it was the injury, but then also some other stuff in my life too that was really challenging for me to deal with, interpersonal challenges um, within my extended family, and it was just becoming more and more difficult for me to bear. And um, Herb,
A-
go
Allison,
ahead.
did you feel that you were experiencing PTSD after that experience? And did that contribute to any type of postpartum or even during pregnancy? You can also have depression and anxiety in pregnancy as a result of PTSD, but it's very commonly correlated with postpartum depression and anxiety.
Yeah, I do. I think I've been experiencing that I think I had postpartum anxiety after my first birth. I was counting my daughter's breaths in the nighttime. I think I was just dealing with new mom anxiety. Um, and then that injury happened for her when she was 17 months old. And then I had the other stress that I mentioned as well. And I kind of was in this mindset where I was like waiting for the next shoe to drop. Like I felt like for some reason, it was like I felt like I deserved the challenges that I was facing. And I just was in a really having a really hard time in my own mind. And yes, I would say that it was a bit of PTSD for certain because that injury was very traumatic. And the hospitals, just all that we went through in that time, and then the other stress too on top of it was just a lot for me. So, Herb's pregnancy, he was a healthy boy. It was a healthy pregnancy other than my mind. So I guess not so healthy in that I was really struggling mentally and struggling with anxiety. And so leading up to his birth, I had that dream and I just had this overwhelming feeling that something was coming my way. Another challenge was coming my way. And I went into labor on November 3rd in the morning, about 4:30 a.m. I woke up. I could hear the highway. We live on a highway, and I could hear the trucks moving down the highway. So that kind of told me that the day was on its way, and I knew that the baby was coming. I could feel him coming, and my contractions were irregular, but I knew what they were. And I remember breathing in my daughter and she was in between my husband and I in bed and I remember thinking, "Oh, this is the last time it'll just be the three of us." And I got up and I had some breakfast and I brought my birth ball into the room that I had prepared for birthing in my home and I started laboring and I actually was able to talk with my midwife last night and get kind of a more accurate picture of the time frame. So around 8:20 a.m. I called my midwife and or I guess it was around actually 9 a.m. I called my midwife and I was having irregular contractions still at that time. And then around 10:11 a.m. I was having strong contractions. And at 10:55 I was having them regularly and I let my midwife know that it was time to come. And I can't remember if I knew this at the time, but she was about an hour and a half away. Um, and I felt very strongly this baby is coming fast. And I had this feeling, I'm not sure if my birth team's going to get here in time. And luckily, my midwife's assistant arrived and she watched me go through a couple of contractions. My husband was out on the porch trying to sort out the birth pool. And I remember her sticking her head out the screen door and saying to him, "We don't have time. Get back in here. The baby's going to be here any moment." And I kept going through contractions. And I was really having a hard time with the contractions. With my daughter, I really enjoyed that labor and that birth. There was never a moment where I felt like I couldn't do it. It felt very, I felt like I was in labor land. Like I felt all of those hormones and, that outer body experience with that labor. And with this one, I feel like it was happening so quickly that maybe my body didn't have time to get into that space or the hormones didn't have time to get online. So I was just mentally struggling through the contractions. It was almost like I didn't want to be in labor. I was just having a hard time being in labor. I remember I said to my husband, "I never want to do this again." I mean, I wonder how many women have said that to their husbands. I said
Many,
A
many,
lot.
something,
many.
yeah, yeah. So I said that classic thing to him. And my midwife's assistant was there. And then at some point, my midwife arrived. I guess she arrived right around 12:30 p.m. And pushing was irresistible for me at that time. And she asked if she could check me, and I said yes. And she at that time discovered a cervical lip. And so we could feel his head. I believe that she could feel his head at that time. And I think that I could too, although I can't remember exactly. But at that time she discovered a cervical lip, and then
May I
she,
interrupt? I would like one of you to
yes,
explain what a cervical lip is because we'll have a lot of viewers and listeners who have never heard that before. So let's explain and tell them what it is.
I can explain that for you.
Okay.
So, as the cervix is opening to complete dilation, which is typically called 10 centimeters, sometimes the last bit of cervix on the front side remains, which you can also call 9.5 centimeters. But centimeters don't really matter. It's really just the absence of the cervix is when you are fully dilated and ready to push. Now, the anterior lip or cervical lip has gotten a bad rap. Most people think of it as a stuck place or an abnormal variation in dilation, and it actually is not. Rachel Reed has an excellent blog article on this that explains I can't remember what the title of the article is, but basically it says that the anterior cervical lip is a normal part of the labor process. It's just the last stage of the cervix disappearing.
hmm. Yeah, so and I talked with my midwife about this last night, and she said she doesn't see them often, and it's usually because she doesn't check, that she feels like she doesn't see them. And so, but for whatever reason, we did this check, and she then was trying to hold the lip aside as I was going through contractions. And when I wrote down my birth story, I wrote at this point, this in my mind was the start of a home birth version of the cascade of interventions, because this was very difficult for me to go through. Her holding the lip aside, it was just excruciating for me to have that, and as I was going through contractions, to have her there kind of helping me. But she said that usually she can just kind of hold it aside and the baby's head will then pop through, and that's it. But that's not what was happening for Herb. She was holding it aside and then he was going back in. And so we kind of went through this moment where he kept getting stuck behind this bit of cervical lip. And I was just I was mentally spiraling before this, and then I just started mentally spiraling even more, just struggling with the sensations, and struggling with the thought, oh, there's something wrong. So I think because I was really not mentally fortified going into this, this was so difficult for me to think, oh, something's wrong. Like he's
How do you remember about how long you were experiencing that anterior lip?
Well, he was born at 2 p.m. and so this was around 12:30.
Okay.
So I'm
So
not
I
exactly sure.
yeah, it was yeah, who knows? Maybe it was a half an hour, maybe it was 45 minutes, depends on how long you were actually pushing. But
Yeah.
this is a lot of the part of the problem with thinking of anterior or cervical lips as a abnormal thing to happen in labor. And I had one in my first labor too, and I remember the exact same thing. Midwife holding the cervix back, and sometimes that works really well, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's really just a big source of stress. So the real
Mm-hmm.
question is, do we even need to worry about cervical lips? Should we even be trying to manage them? Should we just keep our hands out of there? Most likely, yes. Do we
Yeah.
need to know they're there? And how would your experience have been different if you didn't even know that it was ever there?
Right. And these are all questions that I had afterwards. Um, and luckily I had the same midwife with my third birth, and she was really receptive to all of this, receptive to my experience of the story, receptive to me not wanting any checks in my third labor. And I know I'm not going to go into that story, but I'm just really grateful to her for that receptivity, and for the space to be able to process this with her, and for her to be just so receptive. So
I'm
anyway,
sure she's grateful that you trusted her again to do it differently
yeah,
according to
I
your
wouldn't
wishes.
trust, yeah, I couldn't imagine anybody else attending my births. I have the most incredible relationship with my midwife. I love her so much. So this was something that we went through that we've been able to talk about a lot. And Herb's birth was traumatic for us both. So we've had a really we had a really nice time last night, even just kind of reviewing it all and talking about it, and all that she learned and all that I learned as well. But so we went through a number of contractions with that, trying to resolve the lip. At some point, I was on the birthing stool, and I remember my husband was behind me, and he had his. My husband is a very, very steady guy. He's very grounded in my labors, almost annoyingly so sometimes. I, I don't. I mean that in a funny way.
Every
Like,
single quality has its annoying slant. I don't know how it happens.
Right. Elaborate on that a
There's
little bit.
always
What,
that
tell us.
annoying slant. The women who have the neat husbands, like, yeah, but he's too neat and he gets fastidious about it. There's always that slant where the good quality has its little edge. What's this one? So he's steady.
Tell
How
us
can there?
tell us more.
Yeah.
he's just so confident.
And
He's
do you how
Damn
do
him
you
for being so confident during your birth.
yeah.
how
I
do
guess it's in. Sorry, go ahead, Trisha.
how do you what would you wish what would you have wished for him to do other than
I
be
think
steady?
I think I wouldn't change it.
Okay.
I just think my experience of it after the fact, having, looking at the pictures, he's so proud, he's so happy, he's so grateful to be welcoming his children, and I'm like, do you have any idea what I was going? It's just a funny feeling.
Yeah.
Women do
I
feel that
wouldn't
way.
change it though.
Women do feel that way sometimes. They sometimes go through something even when their children are out or they're toddlers and they're going through things. And sometimes those guys are so stable, they see each other differently. Like she's all anxious and worked up about things, and then she wants to be like, "Don't you realize how serious or how risky this was?" And
Yeah, you want them to
that
take a little
that
of the
stable
burden of
person
the
is often right.
you want them to take a little bit of the burden of the stress off you. Like stop being so easygoing, stop being so steady.
Yeah.
Here I am like freaking out. Take a little of it, take a little bit of it for me.
Yeah, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's just a funny observation
Yeah.
that I've noticed within my own self, looking back at photos. But yeah, there's this picture of him, and he's kind of nestled in my neck. And I remember he was chewing calamus root. We are herbalists and use herbs a lot, and so he was chewing this plant that it's a very calming plant. It's something that you can kind of chew on to help your nervous system. And I remember the smell of it was so, I could not handle it. And I couldn't vocalize that I couldn't handle it. So I just was like turning my head from him so that I couldn't smell his breath in this moment on the birthing stool. So that was a moment that really stuck out to me after the fact. And he knew in the next labor not to chew anything or have anything smelly on him whatsoever. So that was a funny moment. And at some point we got off of the birthing stool and made our way back to the bedroom, to the bed that I had birthed my daughter on. And I got into the McRoberts position. I didn't know the name of this position until last night. My midwife told me, but that's how my daughter was born, actually. And so we tried that just to think maybe that's how my pelvis works. Maybe he'll get down below where he's.
Let's
So
explain that.
we'll explain that a little bit because of course we're always telling moms don't be on your back in labor unless of course
I
that's the
know.
position that feels right to you. If it feels right to you, it probably is right to you. It's just the problem is that women are forced onto their backs.
Right.
However, your midwife obviously was worried already about a shoulder dystocia if she instructed you to get in the bed and get on your back. The
Yeah.
McRoberts position is a first line position when you think that the shoulders are stuck,
Yeah.
where you do get on your back and you pull the knees back. Sometimes it even involves suprapubic pressure, where somebody's actually pressing down firmly on the
Yes.
shoulders via the abdomen to try to get them under the pelvic bone.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think she was. She mentioned that, they knew that he was a big baby. They knew the possibility was there. They knew he was having a hard time getting down.
One more question. They knew he was a big baby because of their palpation skills, feeling the baby in your
Yes.
abdomen, not by ultrasound.
Not by ultrasound. Yeah, just her palpating, she felt that he was a big baby. And I mean, I was large, like in in all of my pregnancies. I've been the woman that gets all the comments. Do you have twins in there? I mean, somebody even said triplets one time. You sure you don't have three in there? And I could go on and on about those comments that women get, but that's been my experience with pregnancy. I've carried my babies very far out in front of me, and from behind I don't look pregnant, but um, so that's the comment I've gotten in all of my pregnancies, and so we knew that he was likely a big boy, or a big baby, and I think she did. I think she did anticipate shoulder dystocia at that time. So
Based
I was
on
in
based on what?
based on his size, or probably she maybe she thought that because she felt like he was a big baby that he could present with shoulder dystocia, in addition to the lip as well. I'm not sure.
It
I could.
also, it could have been how the progress, the way he was coming down as you were pushing, because at this point you were already pushing once you got
Yes, I
onto the
was. I
bedding.
was
So
pushing.
she was probably sensing that the pushing was going slower than expected, maybe
Yeah,
based on your first birth, or the fact that it was second baby, and her midwife intuition also was playing a part here.
exactly. Yeah. And she actually had in quotes in my chart, I said at some point, nothing is happening. So I think I just felt like he's not coming down, nothing is happening. So I don't know exactly how many times we changed positions, but I was in the McRoberts and then they got me onto hands and knees at one point. I remember her instructing me to get into like a runner start position. And I just remember holding on to my husband in desperation at this point. Like I was just hanging on to him. He was holding me up. And I think I went from front to back, or from the McRoberts to the runner start once before his head was born. And so what happened was he was anterior and then he turned posterior, which was what was so unusual. So I guess before his head was born, I was doing my own perineal support. I was, and I remember that moment and feeling really empowered in that moment because I could feel his head. They told me his hair is black, and I was, I felt that joy of that moment. Oh, he's coming, he's coming. But I just couldn't get him to move down. And I guess at some point she realized he's stuck. This is shoulder dystocia. They Then my experience at that point, I don't know exactly how many times I went from back to hands and knees, from back to hands and knees, but I at that point felt like I was essentially kind of handled by my husband and the midwives. They were communicating with each other and manipulating my body. And I started to hear prayers being spoken aloud. Lord Jesus, release this baby. And so I could hear the severity of the situation in their voices. At that point, I feel like I left the room. Like I had dissociated. It was excruciating because there were hands inside of me. They were trying to get him out.
Was his head
Allison,
out?
His head
Sorry.
was out.
Okay.
She, at some point, saw his cord, saw that it was pulsing. It was not compressed. It was full of blood. She said she had a moment when she saw that cord where she felt, okay, I can breathe. I need to think. I need to figure out what's going on. And so then she put her hands inside of me and was trying to figure out where his shoulders were. And so she discovered that his right arm was behind his back. And so his shoulders were, instead of being forward, oh, I'm so sorry, my phone. Instead of being flexed. They were, what's the opposite? They were splayed, if that makes sense. So she was able to trace his arm and get it out in front of him. And then at the same time, or around the same time, my midwife's assistant pushed up on my belly, or pulled up on my belly. And so the combination of those things, her getting his arm free and my midwife assistant lifting up on my belly, she was able to the herb was able to be born. And so, go
So
ahead.
yes, usually when they release that other arm, the lower arm, so it's usually the top shoulder that's stuck behind the pubic bone. There's various kinds of dystocias, but the most common one is the top shoulder is stuck on the pubic bone. And if they can actually deliver the lower arm, then it creates space for that top shoulder
Yes.
to move down. And then the lifting of your belly and pressing down, and they're actually pushing down on the baby's shoulder, gets it under the bone. And then they can be born.
Yeah, so he was born then at that time.
Allison, how
And
much was your dream in your mind when this was all going on? Were you dreading the outcome of that dream actually happening, or were you not thinking about it?
I was not thinking about it at this
That's
time.
good.
Yeah, it wasn't until afterwards that I kind of put it together.
Uh-huh.
'Cause yeah, I wasn't really thinking about it. I had the overwhelming feeling going into labor, like just kind of this doom. I don't know how to describe it. This overwhelming feeling of doom, um, which I did not experience in my other pregnancies and labors. So it was just really interesting. Mother's intuition, I guess. But
Definitely.
so, yeah, when he was born, he was white and limp, and they had the resuscitation tray ready. And so he was lying in front of me on the bed, on the tray, and I thought my baby had died. I had a moment where I was like not sure that he was alive. I had a moment before he even was born. Is my baby going to die? So I had those thoughts going in my mind, and I was really scared. And they started resuscitating him. And so at the first minute, his Apgar was 2 at 1 minute, and his cord was very short. He had no tone, no color, no movement, but his heart rate was 150. So that was such a saving grace for him. And I feel so grateful that the cord was still intact at in this time that he, was being resuscitated. The cord was still pulsing to him the whole time. And
Can
so,
can you imagine that sometimes these babies have their cords cut before their full body is born? That especially if
yeah,
it's around the neck, they
yeah.
that was standard practice. They cut the cord, get the baby out. Can you imagine?
I know, and I've thought about that so much, and I don't know if that's standard practice still, but I've thought so many times, I'm so grateful that I was at home and that his cord was intact. And not only that, but also that I was right next to him as he was being resuscitated. I was whispering into his ear, "Come to me, baby. I want you, baby. I want you to be here with me." Like I was talking to him. I was right there with him. So, I've just, you know, sometimes being a home birthing mother, I've received doubt from other people, people casting their own doubt or fear onto me about giving birth at home. And I'm just so glad I was at home. Like I'm just so glad that I was at home with the incredibly capable midwives that I was with my husband, that we were able to just be in that situation together in peace, like in as much peace as possible. So it was just such a blessing. So he was resuscitated with a bag valve mask for newborns. And at, well, right after he was born, my husband proudly declared, "It's a boy." So despite all the fact that he was white and limp and seemingly lifeless, he had so much joy that his son was here. So it was just a really beautiful moment. And he wasn't breathing by 1 minute, but by 5 minutes, his APGAR was 7. And by 10 minutes, his APGAR was 9. So he took about 8 minutes to come around. And I didn't actually know that until last night. I had no idea how much time it was. My midwife shared that with me last night. And I think at 5 minutes, I said, "Can I hold him? Can I pick him up? Can I hold him?" And they were glad to let me do that. And because he had started to pink up, and she just continued to give him air while I was holding him. And she and I both feel that that is what really brought him into his body, was him being on my chest and with me. And then he was here, and he was bruised and scraped, and we were all just we all took rescue remedy. Every single one of us took rescue remedy at that moment. We rubbed a little bit on his temples. And then he was here, and it was so scary there for a moment. And I'm so grateful that we had the outcome that we had. And
How
my
long did that
midwife says,
last? Do you have any idea how long that all lasted?
About eight
from what
minutes.
point?
How long?
About 8 minutes, right?
Eight
You said,
minutes till he was well after he was born, right? That was when the APGAR got normal. But how long was he actually stuck?
oh,
Oh,
stuck.
I don't know that detail. I think about, so at 1:41, I could feel his head, and he was born at 2 p.m. Okay, so I do know. I
Wow.
wrote this down last night. At 1:41, I saw his head and I felt him. That's when I said nothing is happening. Julia, my midwife's assistant, suggested an abdominal lift. I did my own perineal support, and his head was borne into my hand. They moved me to my hands and my knees, had me get into the runner start to shift my pelvis. Leslie had her hands inside of me, discovered plenty of space in the posterior, but then discovered the right arm behind his back. That's when she then saw the cord, and she knew that she had time to think about it. When she got his arm out, he was then born, and his shoulders were bowed back to his back. And then, so
So a
19
shoulder,
minutes.
yeah, that would be
Long time.
very long. That's very long for a shoulder dystocia. Typically, a shoulder dystocia is called a shoulder dystocia if the interval of time between the head and the shoulders is more than 60 seconds,
Right.
Right.
which is a little that's fast. We do know that
Uh-huh.
babies take longer than that, but even in, 8 to 10 minutes between is extremely long.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So at 1:41, I could see his head. It wasn't quite born yet, but um,
Yeah, we don't know how long it took from the time that you saw his head to his head actually being fully out.
yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You don't need to know that.
Yeah, it was somewhere in there. Yeah, so she felt like it was kind of a an atypical shoulder dystocia, but a shoulder dystocia nonetheless. And my midwife actually, she's attended 1,200 births, and she has had one loss, and it was due to a shoulder dystocia. And so she had extensive training because of that, and probably prior to that too, but also because of that. Um, so I felt like she really knew how to handle that situation. And my midwife's assistant as well, they were such a great team. And afterwards, my midwife's assistant, after I had made it from my bath to my bed, she sat down with my husband and I and Herb, the new baby, and she encouraged us to orient towards what did happen. Orient towards what did happen. He's alive. He's in your arms. He's healthy. He's well. And that was so helpful for me because I feel like, especially at that time in my life when I was really struggling with negative thinking, that was something that I really held on to. And it's something I continue to hold on to. Um, so I think if I
And
were to share a takeaway, it would be that mental health is so important going into labor. If there's something unresolved or if there's something that's really challenging you in your life, help is important. Get help, have support.
How would you say that played a role in your birth? This sounds like something that was purely in the physical realm. So that's interesting that you say the takeaway is mental health. How does that connect for you?
I feel like I was just so tense. I
Mm.
feel like I was so tense prior, and then I tensed up even more with the lip and the management of the lip. And I just wonder, had I been so tense, would he have gotten stuck? Um, those are just my wonderings.
well, either way, you know that you experienced a lot of anxiety, and that
I
that
did.
sensation of an impending doom
Mm-hmm.
is anxiety, right?
It
I mean,
is.
sometimes it's intuition too, but it's often anxiety that creates that feeling, and it would make sense based on the PTSD that you had from your daughter's experience.
Yeah.
So if you could do it again, or you could give a recommendation to other mothers who have had a traumatic experience, even if that was their prior birth experience, what would you tell them to do?
I would I would say get really clear on what you're okay with in labor. For me, I think I didn't really think about that prior to this birth. I wasn't thinking about if I wanted to be checked or not. I wasn't thinking about, the types of interventions that might be offered to me in a home birth situation. So I think being really clear on those things is helpful because for me, when I'm in the moment of labor and somebody's asking me if I want something, I'm more likely, or at least then, I was more likely to be like, sure, yes, and I think this can go, this can be applied to any birth setting and scenario. It's important that you're really clear on what it is that you want and what interventions you're okay with. And checking is an intervention. And
Right.
I
Maybe not
think,
knowing that, maybe not knowing the anterior lip would have changed things. Maybe not. Who knows? We don't know.
yeah,
But
I'll never know. But
right.
I do wonder about just that information, if how it would have gone had I not known that information, because like I said, and this is on me, but I really mentally spiraled from that point on in this labor, and I was already struggling to manage it. So it was very difficult, actually, because we went through not only that challenging birth, but then we went through some challenging health issues after the fact. And we are still recovering from all of that. So it continues. I've had another child since then. The birth was very redemptive, and he's incredibly healthy. So that is incredibly healing for me.
How did you feel in your third pregnancy? Did you have a similar experience as in your second pregnancy emotionally?
Yeah, a lot of my stress was ongoing, was still there. Some of this stress in my husband and I's life right now has been going on since 2021, right before my daughter got hurt. So it's just kind of we're trying to deal with it as best we can. And it's definitely still something that causes us stress and that is hard to manage at times. But Perry, my third child, his pregnancy was very healthy. Um, I tended to my mental health by doing EMDR, and I really tried to address a lot of the trauma that I had been through with my daughter's injury and also with the birth of Herb and the other trauma within my family as well.
Were you fearful of a shoulder dystocia with your third?
I was, yeah, I really was. I felt like I knew it was a boy this time. This was the first time I knew the gender of my child. And I felt like he was big. I struggled mentally in the labor with the stuck fear. I really did. At one point, I was begging my husband to take me to the hospital for a C-section just because I felt like I couldn't do it. And honestly, I am not an incredibly religious person, but I'm working on it. And I really do feel like by the grace of God, Perry was born just right. I remember there was this moment where his head emerged and my midwife said, and he's turning and he's coming. And it was just, I just get chills to this day. It was just such a healing moment to know that, oh, my body is trustworthy and I can birth a baby and here he is and he's fine. All I wanted out of that birth was for him to have tone and to scream immediately and be pink. And I got that and I'm just so grateful.